It started as one of those quiet dad missions that nobody writes movies about, you know what I mean? Just a regular weekday evening, a parking lot, a couple of shopping bags, and a man trying to do one good thing for his kid. And somehow that turned into a moment that exposed everything wrong with how power bias and ego collide. I'm telling you this because it still sits heavy in my chest, and because if I don't say it out loud, it just becomes another story people scroll past and forget. So here it is. That evening, I wasn't thinking about politics or policing or race in some abstract way. I was thinking about my daughter. Prom week, senior year, the kind of milestone you circle on the calendar even if you pretend you're too cool to care. My daughter Jasmine was 17, and she should have been buzzing with excitement, stressing over hair, laughing with friends, doing all the normal stuff. But life had already taken a swing at us. 8 months earlier, her mom, my wife, died after a long fight with cancer. And if you've ever watched someone you love fade away like that, you know it doesn't end when the funeral ends. It settles into the walls, into the quiet, into moments that are supposed to be happy. Jasmine told me she didn't even want to go to prom. Said it wouldn't feel right without her mom. I didn't push. I just listened. But a few weeks later, I found this folder my wife had made tucked into a drawer like she knew someone would need it. Printed dress photos, notes, colors, circled store names written in her handwriting. On top, one line that hit me harder than anything else: emerald green would be perfect. I sat there on the kitchen floor with that folder in my hands and thought, yeah, this matters. So I decided I was going to finish what she started. No speeches, no big announcement, just get the dress, bring it home, and give my daughter one night where grief didn't get the final word. I took the evening off, drove to the mall, parked close to the entrance because that's just habit, and walked into the store wearing jean sneakers and a hoodie. Nothing special, just a dad who looked like any other guy wandering around a department store slightly out of his depth. The sales associate was kind, patient, didn't laugh when I asked basic questions, and helped me find exactly what was on that list. Emerald green dress, classic beautiful, shoes, a clutch, a bracelet. I paid skipped gift wrapping because I was in a hurry and walked out feeling lighter than I had in months. That quiet satisfaction you get when you know you did something right. Then I stepped into the parking lot and that feeling vanished. I noticed a police cruiser moving slowly a few rows over. I didn't think much of it at first. Malls have security cops patrol whatever. I kept walking. I got to my car, unlocked it, opened the back door and started loading the bags. And then I heard a voice behind me, sharp and loud enough to cut through the normal parking lot noise. Hey, step away from the vehicle. No greeting, no explanation, just a command. I turned around slowly, hands visible, and saw the officer standing there with his hand resting near his weapon, eyes locked on me like he'd already made up his mind. I said calm as I could, evening officer. I'm just loading my shopping. He didn't relax, didn't even really look at the bags. He asked, "What are you doing here?" That question hung in the air because you and I both know what it really meant. I said I just came from the store, bought a dress for my daughter. He said ID, no reason given. I paused for half a second, not because I didn't have ID, but because I've lived long enough to recognize the moment. The moment where you're being tested, where your tone, your body language, your breathing all suddenly matter more than the truth. I asked, what's the reason for the stop? His jaw tightened. You match a description. I asked a description of what. His voice got harder. Don't argue. Hand me your ID. So I complied. Slowly. Narrated my movements like you're taught to do when you don't want anyone getting jumpy. I handed him my license. He took it, looked at it, then looked back at me and smirked. He glanced at my address and said, "That's a nice neighborhood. What do you do for work to afford that?" And yeah, that happened. That exact line. I felt my chest tighten because that wasn't curiosity. That was judgment. That was someone deciding I didn't belong in my own life. I said, "Officer, is there a reason you stopped me besides me walking to my car with shopping bags?" He stepped closer and said, "Open the bags." Now here's where things always get twisted later. People say, why didn't you just comply? Like compliance magically fixes everything. But compliance didn't stop the stop. It didn't stop the suspicion. It didn't stop the tone. I said, "No, sir. I'm not consenting to a search. I've committed no crime." He laughed that dry laugh that's not humor, it's dominance. "You think you know the law?" I said, "I know my rights." He said, "You're obstructing." I said, "What investigation?" By then, people were watching. Phones were out. You could feel the energy shift like the moment got heavier. 2 more officers pulled up. Back up. They walked over and I could see right away this wasn't how they expected to spend their evening. One of them asked me what was going on. I explained it simply, no yelling, no dramatics. The other officer looked at the bags in my car, then at the first officer, and asked him quietly, "What's your probable cause?" That question changed everything. The first officer said I matched a description. The backup officer frowned. I didn't hear any call. The lie just sat there exposed, hanging in the open. The female officer turned to me and said, "Sir, you're free to go. Sorry for the inconvenience." And for a split second I thought, okay, this is over. It wasn't. The first officer snapped loud enough for every phone to catch it. "He's not free to go." The backup officer's voice dropped firm and controlled. "Let him go." The first officer turned, red eyes locked on me, and said, "You think this is over?" I said quietly, "Yes, I do." And that's when he crossed the line that destroyed him. He threatened retaliation, said he'd file a report, said maybe the merchandise was stolen, said get out of here before I find a reason to arrest you, on camera, with witnesses, with his own colleagues standing there. I asked for badge numbers. The backup officers gave theirs immediately. The first officer refused. The backup officer said it for him, clearly uncomfortable. I typed it into my phone, looked him in the eye, and said, "I want you to remember this moment, because what happens next, that's on you." Then I got in my car and drove away like my life depended on it. Signals, full stop, speed limit, and sure enough I was followed. First by him, then by another cruiser a mile down the road. They were fishing for something, anything. I gave them nothing. When I got home, I didn't say a word about what happened. I walked in, held up the dress, and my daughter burst into tears. The good kind. She hugged me and said it was perfect, said her mom would have loved it, and I stood there holding her, swallowing everything else, because that moment wasn't about me. That moment belonged to her. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote everything down. Times, words, badge numbers, locations, receipts. Because here's the twist that officer never saw coming. I wasn't just any dad. I work federal protective security. I know how to document. I know how to escalate without losing my head. I called my supervisor and said I need to report an incident and I need this on record. By morning, the videos were everywhere. Millions of views. Comment sections exploding. I didn't post them. The witnesses did. And then I did something that still makes people uncomfortable. I went public. I stood in front of cameras in uniform. I brought my daughter. She wore the emerald dress. I told the story calmly, plainly, without yelling. I said, "This happened to me, and I don't want it happening to people who don't have my resources." That image, a father in uniform next to his daughter in a prom dress, it hit people hard. The department moved fast after that. The officer was suspended. Investigators reviewed footage, reviewed reports, and here's another thing he didn't expect. The backup officers told the truth. Their reports didn't match his. No probable cause, no description, no justification. That cracked everything open. They dug into his history and found a pattern. Complaints, stops, always the same communities, always dismissed. This wasn't a bad night, it was a habit. Charges followed. Courtrooms, testimony. He tried to say he felt threatened, tried to say I was uncooperative. But the video showed the truth. A man standing still with shopping bags speaking calmly, while an officer escalated because his authority was questioned. In the end, he lost his badge, his job, and his freedom. Not because the system suddenly became perfect, but because this time the truth was impossible to bury. The lawsuit that followed didn't just pay damages, it forced changes. Oversight, transparency, rules that make it harder to lie and easier to hold people accountable. And here's where the story doesn't wrap up neatly, because the real question isn't whether that officer deserved what he got. The real question is how many people never get justice because they don't have cameras, witnesses, or the ability to push back. How many dads just go home angry and quiet and nothing changes? If I hadn't spoken up, would this have been just another unfounded complaint? Probably. And that's the part that keeps me up. So I want to ask you something honestly. If you were in my place, would you have stayed silent to protect your peace, or would you have gone public and turned your life upside down to force accountability? And if you were one of the bystanders with a phone in your hand, would you have recorded or walked away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Argue with each other if you need to. Tell your own stories. Because conversations like this only happen when people refuse to pretend nothing happened. If this story hit you, share it. Not for me, but for the people who don't get heard. Silence doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it just means the problem survives another day.